Today we're going to talk about the heart. So when you look at a diagram of the heart in a textbook or on an exam paper, you need to know that the right side that you're looking at, that's actually the left heart. And then the left side you're looking at, that's actually the right heart. The reason for this is because if you're looking at someone that's facing back at you, their right arm is actually facing your left arm. And then their left arm is actually facing your right arm. So when you're looking at someone facing you, the right and the left is reversed. And that's what's happening to the heart when you're looking at a diagram. It's facing back at you. So therefore, this is the right side of the heart and this is the left side of the heart. There's 4 chambers in the heart. The 2 chambers at the top, these are called the atrium. And the 2 chambers at the bottom, these are called the ventricle. Now, since the heart pumps blood around the body, the direction of blood flow is important. The atrium is where the blood enters the heart, and the ventricles is where blood exits the heart. Now, since there's 4 rooms, the 4 chambers in the heart, there's going to be 4 blood vessels that's connected to these to deliver the blood, right? So the blood vessels, there's 2 types. There's arteries, and then there's veins. Artery carries blood away from the heart. Artery for way, A for way, away from heart. Whereas veins, they carry blood to the heart. To the heart. Also, you need to know that the heart pumps blood to 2 areas in the body in general. The first area is the lungs. That makes a lot of sense because the heart is pumping oxygenated blood around the body and it picks up that oxygen from the lungs. So it's got to go to the lungs to get that oxygen. The second part that the heart pumps to is the rest of the body. So that's every other organ other than the lungs. That's your brain, your kidneys, your stomach, your muscles, all of it. Also, I've color-coded the red and the blue here. The red represents oxygenated blood, and the blue represents deoxygenated blood. So if you think about this, the red area, oxygenated blood, they must have come from the lungs, right? Because that's where they got the oxygen from. And then the blue area is deoxygenated blood, so it must have come from the body, the rest of the body, because it had a lot of respiration which produces CO2, which is making the blood deoxygenated. So when you look at a heart, have a think about where the blood is coming from and also where the blood is going to. So at this point, let's discuss the circulatory system. Now, since it's a cycle, it doesn't really matter where we start. We're going to start in the lungs. So when blood is in the lungs, they're going to pick up the oxygen in the alveoli, and it's going to carry that oxygenated blood to, well, you tell me, is it right to or left side of the heart? If it's oxygenated blood, it's got to be going to the left side of the heart because that's where oxygenated blood is. Now, is it going to the left atrium or the left ventricle? If it's going to the heart, that's got to be an atrium because that's where blood enters the heart. So it's going into this chamber right now, the left atrium. And what is this blood vessel called that brings that oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium? If it's going to be carrying blood to the heart, is that artery or vein? To the heart. That's got to be a vein. And if it comes from the lungs, the word we use for lung is pulmonary, so that's why it's called the pulmonary vein. So you don't need to memorize this as much if you understand it, okay? In the exam, you just have to think, this is oxygenated blood, so it's got to be going to the left heart and is going into the left atrium to the heart. It's got to be called a vein, and since it came from the lungs because it's oxygenated, it's got to be pulmonary vein. So once this oxygenated blood is in the left atrium, it's going to go down into the left ventricle, and all this oxygenated blood is now getting ready to get pumped to the rest of your body. So it gets pumped, boom, out of the left ventricle through this big vessel. Now, is this vessel which pumps blood away from the heart, that's got to be an artery, isn't it? This one here. So this one is actually the largest artery in your body. It's called the aorta. And it pumps blood to the rest of your body. So you can think of it as going to the rest of your body. Now, let's say it goes to your brain because you're watching this video, you're thinking very hard, your brain needs the oxygen for respiration. It goes all the way up to your brain and it dumps off all the oxygen, picks up all the carbon dioxide because your brain's doing respiration that produces carbon dioxide. So now the blood is deoxygenated, it's leaving the brain. And have a think, where is it going now? Which part of the heart is this deoxygenated blood going to go to? The right side or the left side of the heart? The right side of the heart, isn't it? Because it's where deoxygenated blood is. And which chamber is it going to go into? Is it going to go to the right atrium or is it going to go to the right ventricle? Again, it's got to be the atrium because blood enters the heart through the atrium, right? So this deoxygenated blood is now going to go to the right atrium through this blood vessel. What is this blood vessel called? Is it an artery or a vein? If it's carrying blood to the heart, again, it's got to be a vein. So it's actually called the vena cava. That's the largest vein in your body. There's actually two vena cavas. If you notice, there's one that brings blood from the upper half of your body into the right atrium, and then the deoxygenated blood from the lower part of your body through this called the inferior vena cava, also into the right atrium. So this is called the superior vena cava, and this is called the inferior vena cava. So once this deoxygenated blood is in the right atrium, it's going to go down into the right ventricle. And now think, where does this deoxygenated blood want to go? Where do you want to drop off the deoxygenated blood, which contains carbon dioxide? You want to bring that to which organ? The lungs, isn't it? That's where you can breathe out the carbon dioxide. So this vessel here is clearly going to the lungs. And I don't know if you've noticed, but it's actually split into two because one goes to the left lung and one goes to the right lung. So it's very organized. What is the name of this blood vessel? You can figure it out. It is carrying blood away from the heart now, away from the right ventricle, away. It's got to be an artery. And it's going to the lungs. The word we use for lungs is pulmonary. So therefore, this is called the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery. And now we are back in the lungs, right? So this blood now is back in the lungs. So let's go through this cycle again. We've completed the cycle. Let's go through that again just to recap. Oxygenated blood from the lungs goes to via the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, down into the left ventricle, out of the heart through the aorta, goes to the rest of your body, drops off the oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide, brings that deoxygenated carbon dioxide blood back to the right heart through the superior or inferior vena cava, into the right atrium, down into the right ventricle, out of the right ventricle, through the pulmonary artery, back into the lungs to drop off that carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen and therefore start the whole cycle again. So I don't know if you've noticed, but in this one cycle I just described, the blood actually passed through the heart 2 times. Once through the left heart and then once through the right heart. Did you notice that? And that's why it's called a double circulatory system, because in one cycle, blood actually goes through the heart twice. So this is just another diagram that's colored. Again, the red is oxygenated, the blue is deoxygenated. So let's imagine oxygenated blood from the lungs enters the left atrium here via these pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins means it came from the lungs, pulmonary vein to the heart, from lungs to the heart. And actually these two are also pulmonary vein. So there's actually 4 of them, but they all carry blood into the left atrium. Then that blood is going to go down into the left ventricle and then pump blood, boom, out through here, the aorta. The aorta is easy to recognize because it's got these 3 blood vessels sticking out at the top. So if you see a diagram with these 3 sticking up at the top, that is always the aorta. So this aorta now pumps oxygenated blood to the rest of your body, and then it's going to drop off the oxygen, pick up the carbon dioxide, and that deoxygenated blood is now going to return to the right side of the heart via the vena cava. This is the superior vena cava and also the inferior vena cava. Where are they going to? Well, it's a vein, so it's going to the heart, into the atrium, because atrium brings blood to the heart, down into the right ventricle, and then pumped out, boom, out of the left ventricle through the, this is an artery, right? Because it's leaving away from the heart. Where is it going? It's going to the lungs because it's dropping off the carbon dioxide, and therefore it's pulmonary artery. Now there's one more thing on this diagram that's very important to know, is this thing over here. So this is called a semilunar valve. Semilunar valve. This here, and also these 2 down here, these are called atrioventricular valve. The main point is that they're valves. They're valves because valves keep blood flowing in one direction. And if you think about it, that's very important. You don't want blood going backwards. You don't want any backflow of blood. So the valves, they're kind of like doors that only open one way. So for example, these atrioventricular valves, where's the blood going? The blood is going from the left atrium down into the left ventricle through these valves, right? So the valves only let blood go this way. It does not let blood go back up the other way. So it's important to recognize the valves and be able to label them on a diagram. So now let's have a go at the exam question. It says the diagram shows a section through a human heart. Let's label all of this actually, because we've just been practicing it, right? So this chamber will be the left atrium, and this would be the left ventricle. This is the right atrium, and then the right ventricle, and then we need to know the blood vessels connected to them. So what blood brings oxygenated blood into this left atrium? Well, if it's oxygenated, it's got to be the pulmonary, because it came from the lungs with the oxygen, pulmonary vein, because to the heart. Then it goes down through the left ventricle, out through the aorta. Remember I said anything with these 3 things sticking up there, that is called the aorta. And then it returns the deoxygenated blood through these 2 big ones over here. So this is the vena cava. This is also the vena cava. And then through the vena cava is going to deliver the deoxygenated blood down into the right ventricle, out through here. So that's got to be the pulmonary artery, right? Because it's bringing blood away from the heart, away to the lungs, because it's deoxygenated, so it's going to the lungs to drop off that carbon dioxide. So now that we've labeled everything, why? We haven't labeled why yet. What are these? What are these little gates that keep blood flowing in one direction? In this case, just down from the atrium down into the ventricle. They've got to be the valves. In this case, it's called the atrioventricular valves. It's easy to remember because it's connecting the atrium and the ventricle. That's why it's called atrioventricular valves. Great. So now we can answer the question. The blood in vessel X is transported to an organ. Name the organ. So blood vessel X is right here. That blood, trace it back. It came from this chamber, which was the right ventricle. Right ventricle is the right side of the heart, carries deoxygenated blood, and therefore it's got to be going to the lungs. So therefore it's going to the lungs. State 2 changes to the blood in this organ. Well, think about what happens to the blood in the lungs. It's going to drop off, or it's going to release, okay, the carbon dioxide, and then it's going to pick up oxygen at the alveoli. So in other words, when the blood is in the lungs, the carbon dioxide level is going to go down, and then the oxygen level is going to increase, right? So CO2 will decrease and the oxygen will increase. Okay, a different question. It says the diagram shows the structure of the human heart. And I think you're very comfortable labeling these now, right? Chamber A, that's got to be the left ventricle. And then chamber B is the right ventricle. Structure C, ooh, looks like the valves to me. Atrioventricular valves. Side X has got to be the right side because it's on your left. And then side Y is going to be the left side because it's on your right. Okay, explain question A1. Explain how you know that X is the right side of the heart. Okay, you got to look at the walls. Do you see how the right side of the heart, the walls are much thinner, whereas the left side is much thicker? Think about why. The left side pumps blood, boom, through the aorta to the rest of the body. So basically to the whole body. That requires a lot of force, and therefore the walls are very thick. Whereas the right side, where does that pump blood? Boom, out of the pulmonary artery goes where? Pulmonary goes to the lungs. And do you think that's a very far way to travel? No, the lungs is right next to the heart. So it doesn't need very, very thick walls at all. So when it says explain, you've got to give a reason. It's because X side has thinner walls. And you can't just say that, you have to explain, right? Because only needs to pump blood a short distance, which doesn't require a lot of force, to the lungs. Okay, next part. Give the name of chamber A. Chamber A, right here. Left ventricle. And look how thick the walls are, right, of the left ventricle, because it's pumping blood to the whole body through the aorta. And it says, on the diagram, label the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery, pulmonary artery. Have a think, have a think. Artery means blood away from the heart. That's got to come out of the ventricles, right? It's either right or left ventricle. And if it's going to pulmonary, which is the lungs, is it the right or the left side of the heart that pumps blood to the lungs? If you remember, the right side of the heart, which is this side, is deoxygenated blood, right? And then the left side is oxygenated blood. So based on that, think more. Is it going to be the left or right that pumps blood to the lungs to drop off the deoxygenated blood? It's got to be the left side, the right side that pumps blood to the lungs. And if it's going to be artery, that's got to be coming from the ventricle. So it's got to be this blood vessel basically that is linked to the right ventricle, because that's where all the deoxygenated blood is. So therefore this is the pulmonary artery. And last part says explain the difference in the structure of the walls of chamber A and chamber B. What would you say? Again, it goes back to the thickness of the walls. So you would say that chamber A is the left ventricle. There's more muscle, and the reason is because it's got to generate more pressure or more force, because it's got to pump blood to the entire body. Whereas for chamber B, you don't need a lot of muscle. That's why the walls are so thin, right? You don't need a lot of muscle because it doesn't have to pump blood so far away. So that's how you would explain it. Okay, so you would say chamber A, more muscle to generate stronger force or stronger pressure to pump blood to entire body. Whereas for B, less muscle or thinner muscle, because only need pump blood to nearby lung. So it doesn't need a lot of force for doing that. And then the next question says, give the name of structure C and then describe the function of structure C. So structure C is this here. The name is atrioventricular valve. And then the function is, like I said, key word for valve is keep blood flowing in one direction, or in other words, prevent backflow of blood. So this would be atrial ventricular valve, and that is to prevent backflow of blood. If there's one key word or keywords you associate with valve, is to prevent backflow of blood. Finally, it says suggests sometimes a baby is born with a hole between chambers A and B, suggests the effects that this condition may have on the baby. So there's going to be a hole between chamber A, which is here, and chamber B. So basically a hole here. That hole is sometimes called a ventricular septal defect. You don't need to know that, but if you ever heard of it, a VSD, that's what it is. Okay, it's a hole between the two ventricles. So have a think. If that happens, what would happen? What would be the effect of this? Well, when the heart pumps, if there's going to be a hole here, well, the left side of the heart has more pressure, right? Because we just talked about it. It's got thicker walls. So when they pump, they squeeze the blood at the same time. The left and the right ventricles squeeze blood at the same time. But because it's more force over here than this side, it's going to squeeze that blood to the right side of the heart. And when it does that, the oxygenated blood is going to mix with the deoxygenated blood. Basically, these two types, the red and the blue blood, they're going to mix. And if they mix, you end up having less oxygenated blood going to the aorta because some of it went over here, right? So there's less oxygen that ends up in the rest of the body. And think about the person. How would they feel if there's less oxygenated blood being delivered to the body? Less oxygen, less respiration. How would they feel? They'll feel tired. They might not grow as much. So that's how you think about this question, all right? So you would say oxygenated and deoxygenated blood will mix, right? It'll mix. Or in other words, you can also say the oxygenated blood gets pumped into the right ventricle from the left ventricle, right? From the left ventricle. And what's the consequence of that? From the left ventricle, because there's more pressure on that side. And the consequence of that is that less oxygen delivered to the body, because that's the job of the left ventricle, right? But it's not doing its job properly because of the hole there. And therefore, there's going to be less respiration. And when you see respiration, you should also be saying less energy, because these two are tied together, right? Less energy, or sometimes you call it ATP. And then as a result, think, what happens to the baby? Make sure you answer the question, right? What will it do to the baby? What's the effect of the baby? Tired, less growth, small size. And that's it. One more question, okay? Just one more question on the heart. So it says the diagram shows the human heart with 4 chambers and 4 blood vessels labeled A to H. Complete the table by writing the label letter that matches the description of the structure. The first one has been done for you. So this should be very straightforward for us now after we've done so many questions together. In fact, let's just label this up here first. This is the left ventricle, right? Left atrium. And therefore on this side, that's got to be the right atrium. And A is the right ventricle. Okay, then we said that the left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs, therefore pulmonary. And if it's bringing blood to the heart, because it's going this way, right, into the atrium, that's got to be a vein, because veins carry blood into to the heart. Then follow the blood goes from the atrium down into the ventricle, and then boom, gets pumped out. So if it gets pumped out, that's an artery, because blood away from the left ventricle, away, that's the aorta up here. These are all oxygenated blood. And then deoxygenated blood enters the heart, the right heart, through which vessel? D or C, tell me. How does blood enter the right heart? Well, it enters into the right atrium, which is this room, and therefore it enters through here. Here. That's the blood flow direction. So it enters through here, and if it enters into the heart, into the atrium, it's got to be a vein, so it's got to be vena cava, and then it goes down into the right ventricle and pumps up and out through, this has got an artery, right, because it's leaving the heart away from the heart. Where's it going? Where's it going? Deoxygenated blood to the lungs, obviously, therefore it's got to be pulmonary artery because it's bringing blood away from the heart. So after we've done that, then it says the chamber that pumps blood to the lungs. To the lungs. Which one is going to the lungs? That's got to be A, because it's the chamber. Please read carefully, not the blood vessel. The chamber that pumps blood to the lungs. So it's got to be this one. Deoxygenated blood, right ventricle, pumps blood, boom, through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. So that's why this one is A, to the lungs. And then the chamber with the thickest muscle wall, that is obvious, that is H, isn't it? Which is the left ventricle, H right there. Next, the blood vessel containing blood at the highest pressure. Ooh, which one has the highest pressure? It's got to come from an artery, right? Because artery is boom, just away from the heart, literally just got pumped out of the heart. So it's got to be an artery. So there's only two arteries on this diagram, aorta or pulmonary artery. Which one do you think has a higher pressure? It depends on where they're going, where they bring the blood. The aorta is boom to the entire body, whereas the pulmonary artery is just boom to the lungs. So highest pressure has got to be the aorta, E, isn't it? Highest pressure. And then finally, the blood vessel carrying blood with the least oxygen to the heart. Where is it carrying the least oxygen? Means deoxygenated blood, right? When I say least oxygen, it means deoxygenated blood to the heart. When you see the word to the heart, you should be thinking veins or arteries. To the heart. Veins. So it's either going to be vena cava or pulmonary vein. And which one has deoxygenated blood? It's got to be the right side of the heart. And therefore, it's got to be the vena cava, and that will be C.